The transport plane's engines wound down as we touched ground at Fort Bragg, and I felt that familiar mixture of relief and anticipation that came with every homecoming. 15 months in Afghanistan, my third deployment since 2009, and I was finally back on American soil. The desert dust still clung to my gear, but all I could think about was Sarah's face, the way she'd light up when she saw me walking through those terminal doors. I'd been counting down the days for weeks. Sarah and I had video called whenever. The connection allowed, her voice a lifeline across the 8,000 miles that separated us. She'd seemed different during our last few calls, distant, maybe tired. I'd chalked it up to the stress of managing everything alone while I was gone. The house, her job at the elementary school, the loneliness. I knew it wasn't easy being a military spouse. Hell, it wasn't easy being married to someone who disappeared for months at a time, leaving behind only promises and uncertainty. The guys around me were talking about their plans, steaks, cold beer, sleeping in their own beds. Martinez was going to surprise his kids at school. Thompson was planning a weekend getaway with his wife. Me? I just wanted to hold Sarah, to feel like I was home again. Really home. Not just visiting between deployments. My phone buzzed as we processed through the arrival procedures. A text from Sarah. "We need to talk when you get home. It's important. No, welcome back. No, I missed you. No, I love you." Just those 9 words that somehow made my stomach drop faster than any mortar round ever had. The drive home felt longer than usual, even though I'd made it countless times before. Our neighborhood looked the same. Suburban lawns, minivans, the American flag still hanging from the Johnsons' porch. But something felt off. Like looking at a photograph of a place you used to know rather than the place itself. Sarah's car was in the driveway, but the house felt empty when I walked in. She was sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd eaten breakfast on my last morning home, where we'd planned our future over coffee and toast. There were papers spread in front of her, official-looking documents that I didn't want to recognize but somehow did. "You're home," she said, not getting up, not smiling. Her voice was flat, careful, like she'd rehearsed this moment. "I'm home," I replied, setting down my duffel bag. The sound it made hitting the floor seemed to echo through the house. She looked older somehow, though it had only been 15 months. There were lines around her eyes I didn't remember, and she was wearing her hair differently. Everything about her seemed carefully arranged, distant. "How was the flight?" she asked. "The kind of small talk you make with strangers." "Long." I sat down across from her, suddenly aware of how I must look. Tired, weathered, still carrying the weight of deployment in my posture. "Sarah, what's going on?" She slid the papers toward me. Divorce papers. The words blurred together as I tried to process what I was seeing. Irreconcilable differences. Division of assets. Custody arrangements for the life we'd built together. "I've met someone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone better." The words hit harder than anything I'd faced overseas. In Afghanistan, you knew where the threats were coming from. You could see the danger, prepare for it, fight back. This blindsided me completely. "Better how?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. She looked past me, out the window toward the yard where we'd planted a garden 3 years ago, back when I thought we were building something permanent. "Someone who's here, Jake. Someone who doesn't leave for months at a time. Someone who doesn't come back different every time, a little more distant, a little more closed off. Someone who can actually be present for a relationship." I wanted to argue, to fight for us, to explain that everything I'd done was for us, for our future, for the country we both loved. But sitting there, looking at the woman I'd married 6 years ago, I realized I might have been fighting the wrong battle all along. The silence stretched between us like the distance I'd just crossed to get home, and I understood that this homecoming was actually an ending. The weeks that followed were a strange kind of warfare, fought in lawyers' offices instead of battlefields, with legal briefs instead of tactical plans. I moved into a cramped apartment off base, the kind of place that rented by the month to soldiers between assignments and guys whose lives had fallen apart in various predictable ways. Sarah had been methodical about it all. While I was gone, she'd consulted an attorney, opened her own bank account, even started individual therapy. She'd been planning this exit strategy for months, maybe longer, while I was sending her emails about how much I missed her and making plans for when I got home. "I tried, Jake," she told me during one of our few civil conversations, when we were dividing up kitchen utensils and deciding who got what books. "I really tried to be okay with it all, but every time you left, I felt like I was mourning you all over again, and when you came back, you were different. A little more silent, a little more somewhere else." I wanted to tell her about the weight of command, about making decisions that affected other people's lives, about watching young soldiers under my care get hurt and having to keep leading anyway. I wanted to explain how you learn to compartmentalize, everything just to function, and how that becomes a habit that's hard to break even when you're home. But explanations felt like excuses, and excuses wouldn't change anything. His name was David. He taught at the same elementary school where Sarah worked, coached Little League on weekends, drove a sensible Honda Civic. He'd never missed a parent-teacher, conference, or a school play. He was there for every ordinary Tuesday, every random Saturday morning, every small moment that makes up a life. "He makes me laugh," Sarah said one evening when she came by to get more of her things. It was such a simple statement, but it cut deep. When was the last time I'd made her laugh? When was the last time I'd been present enough, relaxed enough? To be funny? I'd become a stranger in my own life. 3 deployments in 6 years will do that. You learn to live in temporary spaces, to pack light, to not get too attached to routines or places or even people. It's a survival mechanism over there, but it's poison for a marriage. My buddies tried to help in their well-meaning way. "She couldn't handle being a military wife," Martinez said over beers at the NCO club. "Better you find out now than later." But I knew it was more complicated than that. Sarah had been strong enough to handle the deployments, the uncertainty, the fear. What she couldn't handle was coming back to someone who'd learned to live without her. The anger came in waves. At Sarah, for giving up on us. At David, for being everything I apparently wasn't. At the Army, for asking so much. At myself, for thinking I could have both, the career I'd built and the woman I loved. Some nights, I'd lie awake in my empty apartment, replaying conversations, looking for the moment when things started going wrong, when the distance between us became unbridgeable. My company commander called me in for a meeting. Word travels fast in a unit, and divorce affects everything: your security clearance, your focus, your reliability. "You doing okay, Sergeant?" he asked, though we both knew the answer. "I'm handling it, sir," I replied, because that's what you say, what you're trained to say. You handle things. You adapt and overcome. You don't fall apart, even when everything you thought was solid turns out to be built on sand. But late at night, alone in that apartment, I wasn't handling it at all. I was drowning in the space between who I'd been and who I needed to become. The soldier in me wanted to fight, to develop a strategy, to win. The man in me was beginning to understand that some battles can't be won because they were lost before they ever began. The divorce papers sat on my kitchen counter for days before. I signed them next to the photos Sarah had left behind, pictures of us from before, when we still believed in forever. 6 months after the papers were signed, I found myself sitting in a VA counseling office, staring at a box of tissues I hadn't touched and talking to a woman who'd heard this story in a dozen different variations. Dr. Martinez, no relation. To my buddy from the unit, had kind eyes and the patience to let me work through things at my own pace. "What does better mean to you?" she asked, echoing Sarah's words from that first day home. I'd been angry about that word for months. Better. As if there was some objective measure of human worth, some scoreboard where David had simply outscored me. But sitting in that office, I was beginning to understand what Sarah had really meant. David wasn't better than me. He was better for her. He was available in ways I'd never learned to be. Present in ways that years of military training had conditioned out of me. He could offer her a Tuesday night dinner conversation without the weight of command decisions, a Saturday morning laugh without the mental calculations of tactical awareness that had become second nature to me. The hardest part wasn't accepting that the marriage was over. It was accepting my role in its ending. I'd been so focused on being a good soldier that I'd forgotten how to be a good husband. Every deployment had reinforced the same lesson. Depend on yourself. Stay alert. Keep your emotions in check. Be ready to leave at a moment's notice. Those skills kept me alive overseas, but they slowly killed my marriage. I made her feel alone, even when I was home, I told Dr. Martinez during one session. I was there physically, but I was still living like I was deployed, like everything was temporary. The revelation didn't make it hurt less, but it made it make sense. I started making changes, small ones at first. I bought furniture for the apartment, real furniture, not just the bare minimum. I joined a civilian gym instead of just using the base facilities. I started saying yes when coworkers invited me to barbecues or birthday parties. I was learning how to be present in my own life. Sarah and I developed a careful politeness. We'd see each other occasionally around town. It's a small military community. And we'd nod, exchange pleasantries about the weather or mutual friends. She looked happy, lighter somehow. David seemed like a decent guy, the kind who'd remember anniversaries and show up to things on time. The anger faded gradually, replaced by something harder to define. Not quite acceptance, not quite regret, but a recognition that we'd both done the best we could with who we were at the time. Sarah had needed someone who could build a life in one place, someone whose job didn't require him to become someone else in order to survive. I'd needed to learn how to be fully present before I could offer that to anyone. A year later, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible during those first dark months. I didn't re-enlist. 20 years in the Army had been the plan. But plans change. I used my GI Bill to go back to school, studying business management at the local state university. Sitting in classrooms with kids young enough to be my younger siblings, I felt ancient and new at the same time. I met Linda at a coffee shop near campus. She was a graduate student in social work, divorced herself, with 2 kids from her first marriage. She understood complicated histories, the way people can love each other and still not be right for each other. Our first few dates were careful affairs. 2 people who'd learned that love isn't always enough, that compatibility matters as much as chemistry. "What happened with your marriage?" she asked one evening over dinner, the kind of direct question I'd learned to expect from her. "I was fighting the wrong war," I said, surprising myself with the honesty. "I was so busy being a soldier that I forgot how to be a husband." She nodded, understanding without judgment. Sometimes we have to lose everything to figure out who we really are underneath all our roles and responsibilities. 3 years post-divorce, I can see Sarah's point more clearly. She didn't leave because she stopped loving me. She left because she loved herself enough to want more than what we'd become. She wanted someone who could be fully present for the small moments, someone who wouldn't always be mentally preparing for the next mission. I wasn't that person then. I'm working on becoming that person now. Some nights I still think about what might have been different. If I'd gotten help earlier, if I'd recognized the cost of emotional distance, if I'd been brave enough to be vulnerable instead of just brave enough to deploy. But mostly I'm grateful. Grateful that Sarah had the courage to ask for what she needed. Grateful that the end of one story became the beginning of another. Grateful that better doesn't have to be a judgment. Sometimes it's just an honest assessment of what works and what doesn't. The soldier in me will always be part of who I am. But now I'm learning to be other things too. A student, a civilian, a man who can show up for ordinary Tuesday nights and find meaning in the mundane. I'm learning that being present is its own kind of courage, and that sometimes the most important battle is the one you fight to become fully yourself in your own life. Sarah was right. She did find someone better. Better for her, for the life she wanted to build. And in losing her, I found the motivation to become someone better too. Better for myself, and maybe someday, better for someone else who needs what I'm learning to offer.